And a one, and a two, and a skiddly-doo. Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
We've been gone a while.
You know our names by now.
I'm Jeremy Kessler.
I'm Brittany.
I'm Marco.
You're a liar is what you are.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Jeremy Kessler.
I'm
Let's keep this short.
We're about to go see Dr. Sleep. I'm more excited than I would expect to be for going to see a sequel to The Shining. Because The Shining is one of my favorite movies ever.
Right.
And probably the best horror movie ever made, in my opinion. But you know what? This sequel is getting a lot of really good word of mouth. I don't usually like sequels that aren't directed by the same person or don't feature any of the same cast. Mm-hmm. But if this can be a movie that doesn't try to do Shining greatest hits, but tries to be its own story that just continues the universe, I'll be totally good with that.
I only very recently experienced The Shining. I read the book, and then the day I finished the book, I watched the movie, which I know is not the greatest way to experience media. It resulted in me not caring too much for the movie that day. That being said, I think that this looks good, and I like The Shining.
Have you watched the movie again since then?
Yes, I think so. I haven't read the book for this one. I just know that there is a book. I think that this looks good. It's got potential to be interesting. The trailer makes it look like it could be what you were saying, Oliver, removed enough that it's not, banking off of
Right, the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's promising that the words The Shining are not in the title.
It's not like The Shining,
2.
Dr. Sleep.
You might not even know that it's a sequel to The Shining if you haven't seen the trailer.
I'm actually kind of hoping that it doesn't rely heavily on the fact that it is a sequel to The Shining, only because I've only seen The Shining one time. I'm definitely more familiar with it in a pop culture reference kind of way than I am with the story itself, because I saw it once and it was years ago. That being said, I don't know much about the movie. I feel like this is one of the few times we're coming into the movies where I don't really have very many expectations.
Right.
Because I don't really know what to expect. I hope it's not too scary.
I
I like Ewan McGregor, so
love Ewan McGregor. And I think that's great casting.
Mm-hmm.
I did hear one spoiler. Among all the good reviews that I heard, I did hear one spoiler, which I'm very upset about. I don't want to say what it is because this guy doesn't know what it is. I told you what it was.
I forgot.
It sounds completely ridiculous, and I hope that it's either false or it's handled much better than I think it's going to be. Again, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you can't remake The Shining because that's not okay. And in a lot of ways, it's not cool to try to remix The Shining either, so hopefully this can just do its own thing.
Right. Let's go see it.
Hey.
We just got out of Dr. Sleep. I'll start by saying I won't say surprised because I did have decent expectations. So I'll just say I had a very good time watching this movie. I really, really enjoyed it, and not just as a Shining sequel, but as its own movie. Because the first thing that you can say about this is that it stands on its own extremely well, and actually the weaker parts of the movie are when it decides that it wants to rely on The Shining, which it doesn't have to do because it has a very cool original story with characters that exist totally independently of that, and I think that that's really cool.
And to that note, it does not rely on The Shining a lot.
No.
Right.
Even if you hadn't seen The Shining or had only seen it once many years ago, like myself, I think you get the point of what they're trying to do. And the callbacks to The Shining, I feel, are more done for people who like the movie and wanted to feel like this was connected. If you hadn't seen it or didn't really have strong feelings about it, you could still go in and enjoy this movie on its own because it gives you enough information to enjoy it as a movie, not as a sequel.
It's not totally removed from The Shining. In fact, it does what most sequels should do because it's a logical progression to the story It just is concerned more with telling more story than it is with saying, hey, remember The Shining.
Right.
And, you know, the parts where it does say, hey, remember The Shining, are at parts where it's like, well, you have to do that because you're still in the Shining universe, so it's still important to make mention, you know. It's not a show-stopping thing except for on a couple of occasions. However, when those occasions rise up, they are very much like, I see what you did. It is The Shining.
I mean, if anything, I felt that this movie was almost darker because I feel like a lot of what was going on in The Shining was, like, we didn't really know why everything was happening. Like, a lot of it, like, unless you had read the book, I'm sure there was more information. But in terms of just the movie, you don't really, like, know why this is happening. You just know that it's happening. Whereas in this movie, things are happening and they're telling you why they're happening. You're like, fuck, okay, like, this is what we're doing. We're going to eat little kids. And it's fucking terrifying.
Because it is scary. It's disturbing for sure. But this is not the same kind of horror as The Shining was. Mm-hmm. You know, The Shining was it was less about the demons and more about
psychologically.
Right, and turning over to your dark side. Mm-hmm. This is about building mythology behind a really cool concept and exploring that if this concept existed, you'd have really fucked up people and fucked up things going on. It almost functions more as a fantasy movie than it does a horror film.
That was going to be my next point, is that this movie, you can remove yourself from it because it is a fantasy. Whereas in The Shining, it is much more of a psychological horror, whereas it's, shit, I could go crazy if I were in this kind of situation, and how would I react in this scenario? You know, it didn't have to be about ghosts and demons. It could have just been about losing your mind, being in the middle of nowhere. And that's the scary part. Whereas this is scary and terrifying and horrifying because of the nature of the fantasy, not necessarily because you're like, oh fuck, what would I do if this happened to me?
And I actually think one of the biggest hindrances on the movie is it trying to be more of a horror film than it actually is. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the things are just effectively creepy without these really loud sounds or all these jump scares.
Yeah, I do feel like it was very heavy on the jump scares, especially in the earlier half of the movie. I felt like for the first half of the movie, I really was sitting there considering, like, am I going to be able to sit through this whole movie if this is how I feel, you know, in the first 20 minutes, and it's not letting up. But I was happy because as the story went on a little bit more, they got a little more spaced out.
Because at first, it's trying to live up because you hear it's a Shining movie and you think horror movie, but that's not necessarily the case. Right. And the things that are scary by themselves.
Right.
I think that, like, thinking about the events of the movie and probably the script, I don't think it had to be a horror movie other than that it's related to The Shining. I don't know if you guys said something like that. I'm slightly distracted, I'm sorry.
It's almost like a plot that you'd see, and this is going to sound like I'm bagging on the movie, but I'm really not, because I like these movies, but it almost feels like an X-Men plot, like an early 2000s X-Men where they're all camping out in the woods and you have all these mutants eating the other mutants. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. You know, and I'm not saying that to bag on it. I like those movies. They're fun movies, and this almost picks up that vibe more than it does a Shining vibe.
Well, just to say, I always go, after these movies are over, I always go and I go on Reddit and I just like to see what other people have to say. People were most comparing it to Star Wars, which I said at the very end, especially just because it's Ewan McGregor. They were contributing it to Star Wars, and then they were contributing it to Twilight. Was one person was saying.
Yep, I can see that.
At first, I was like, "Wow, that's kind of like a dig." But the more you think about it, it actually is kind of true, because it does give you like something that would be like innately scary and makes it a little less scary just because of the way that they handled it. The street sweepers here. Wow, he came really close to the car.
That was scary.
And I think just the way that they had Rebecca Ferguson act, although she was captivating, I feel, and magnetic and in her
she
performance.
was chewing scenery the whole time
And-
she was on this. She sold it.
Yeah.
So she was such a good
She was
villain.
great. I think she was the probably one of the best parts of the movie. But like thinking about it a little bit more, the hat, the dreadlocks, the hippie vibe, like the way she talked, the way she walked, is like, yeah, this does feel a little bit like Twilight to me. More in like I can actually sit here and watch this and not be like disgusted the entire time.
If it works though.
Right.
That's what's important to remember. All the characters are very memorable in this movie. Everybody has an agenda that they're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has personal growth to go through in the movie, including the villains.
Yeah.
And I think that's in and of itself very impressive of any sequel.
Right.
You think about a movie like Jurassic World and why that was such a forgettable thing is because there are no characters.
Right. I'd even say this film goes as far as to almost make you sympathize with your villains at one point in time. Like,
Oh, yeah.
And not because...
Well, they're evil
good
the
people.
whole way
They're
through.
Evil. No, but it just the thought process and like the rationale behind some of it is you're like,
Right.
okay, like I not that I agree, but like I can at least understand
Well,
where
everybody
these villains are
is
coming
three-dimensional.
from.
Nobody is a cartoon
Right, there are
mustache
layers. Yeah,
twirling,
exactly.
and that's a big criticism that people have of The Shining, and it's not something that I feel, because I think that Jack Nicholson performance is Hall of Fame, one of the best of all time. But a lot of people say that he goes from 0 to 100 real quick. He starts normal, and then it's almost like snap the fingers and it's different.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made for another time about why that's not the case, but the point is you can't even look at this movie and feel that way because everybody is naturally developed.
Right.
And I especially love what they did with Danny. At the beginning of the movie, you're seeing how fucked up he is, and he is not only having trouble, but he's not likable at the beginning.
Right. And it's funny because when the movie started, I was even thinking to myself, because of how unlikable he was and how much of a mess he was, I was like, wow, like, this isn't at all what I thought this was going to be.
Right,
like,
am I going to root for
like,
this guy?
Yeah, like, this isn't, like, from the trailers and from my own, I didn't have a lot going into it, but from what I had, that wasn't it, so...
They give you a very realistic depiction of somebody who is an addict,
Has a troubled past.
Yep, is struggling with PTSD.
Yep.
And that's not a fun person to hang out with.
Right.
It's hard to look at, and so progression of the character, obviously you're rooting for him at the end, but it's a very good, effective character arc.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and give this movie an A-. I really, really, really dug it. And if you told me that there was going to be Shining 3 or Dr. Sleep 2 tomorrow, I'd be there to see it. Just a very well put together movie.
I don't think I said before whether or not I liked the movie in the video. But I did like it. I am going to give it a B. I liked it. I don't think I want to give it higher. I don't know, I almost feel like it's a movie that is not going to stay the same way that Shining does.
And that's fair too, but I almost feel like any of these characters have the same staying power as anybody from The Shining. The issue is that The Shining came first. But if this just existed as Dr. Sleep, I almost feel like it would have more staying power than it is going to have.
There's no way to know. But I did overall, like, really enjoy the movie throughout. Yeah, this movie was 2.5 hours. I didn't necessarily feel that. I don't know about you guys.
No, I thought it flew right by.
I felt it in the end. The last act, I did kind of feel it. And only for the sheer fact that it was getting late, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm tired.
Well, and that last act is designed to be like, okay, you wanted The Shining, here's The Shining.
I'm like somewhere between a B and a B plus. No, I'm gonna give it a B. The reason that I can't give it more than that is just for the sheer fact that I just hate jump scares, and I really, really think that the beginning of this movie was relying heavily on that. I think that for them it was a useful tool because oh, you want a horror movie? Here's some horror. Here's some jump scares, you know. But for me, I want to enjoy the story without feeling so on edge the whole time. Like, I know a lot of people like that. I'm not one of those people. That's why it's going to be a B for me.
Good night, everybody.